The internet is currently drowning in a sea of mass-produced, low-effort content that lacks a human pulse. Brianna Brownell recently outlined 7 essential rules for avoiding this digital mess in a post for the Descript blog. By the end of this video, you will know how to use artificial intelligence as a creative tool without sacrificing your unique voice or logical coherence. Writing for the Descript blog recently, Brownell dissected how unchecked generative tools strip away our unique creative voice and replace it with predictable, boring generalities. The real danger isn't just that this writing is boring. It's that a hidden mathematical flaw in how these systems think makes them completely incapable of maintaining a coherent narrative thread, a vulnerability we are going to expose today. Let's define what we are actually fighting against here. AI slop isn't necessarily grammatically incorrect, misspelled, or poorly formatted. In fact, it is often polished, grammatically flawless, and perfectly structured on the surface, but it is fundamentally empty. It is low-effort, mass-produced content that ships with zero human judgment, zero editing, and zero original thought. When you can generate a complete, multi-page essay, article, or video outline in a matter of seconds, the temptation to hit publish immediately is incredibly high. But what is the point of hitting publish if the output is garbage? The internet does not need more noise, and your audience certainly does not need more automated filler. My take on this is that we've mistaken the elimination of friction for the creation of value. Just because a machine made it easy to write doesn't mean it made it worth reading. When you feed a generic prompt into a standard chatbot, it searches its training data for the most statistically probable sequence of words. It does not care about truth, it does not care about your unique perspective, and it certainly does not care about keeping your audience engaged. It just cares about completing the mathematical pattern. It will give you the most average representation of the topic possible, because that is exactly how these predictive engines are optimized to function. They do not seek truth, originality, or artistic resonance. They seek consensus. They look at the vast expanse of their training data, identify the most common patterns, and replicate them. When you ask a language model to explain a concept, it is not drawing from a deep personal understanding of the subject. It is running a highly complex probability game, calculating which word is statistically most likely to follow the previous one. This means that, by definition, the raw output of a generative model will always be the most average, uninspired version of that idea. It is the mathematical mean of human thought. But the problem runs even deeper than a lack of originality. There is a fundamental mathematical flaw in how these systems construct long-form narratives, and it has to do with how they manage context. When an AI writes, it does not outline its arguments or map out a path to a conclusion. It builds the road as it drives, looking only at the immediate patch of tarmac directly in front of its wheels. In computer science, this leads to a phenomenon known as semantic drift. With every new sentence the model generates, the mathematical probability distribution shifts slightly. Over a few hundred words, these tiny deviations accumulate. By the time the model reaches the end of a page, it has drifted so far from its original premise that the narrative thread completely unravels. Have you ever read an automated article and felt a strange sense of cognitive vertigo? You are reading grammatically perfect sentences, yet you suddenly realize the author has completely forgotten the core point they made just 3 paragraphs ago. That is semantic drift in action. It is why automated drafts often read like a series of disconnected paragraphs that repeatedly circle the same ideas without ever making actual progress. The machine is trapped in the narrow window of its immediate memory. It cannot hold a complex multi-layered argument in its head because it simply does not have a head to hold it in. This is also where the way we use generative AI needs to change. The problem is not simply that people are using AI, it is that too many workflows begin with an empty chatbot and a vague instruction like, write me an article about this, then expect the model to somehow provide the research, structure, voice, facts, perspective, and finished content all at once. A more useful approach is to give the system something real to work from. That is why Narratora, a generative content automation platform, was created around a source-first workflow instead of an empty prompt box. The basic idea is simple. Start with your own material. Whether that is an article, research paper, interview transcript, report, YouTube discussion, or other source, and transform that material into a structured professional output. So instead of asking a generic chatbot to invent a long-form YouTube script from a broad topic, you could give Narratora an interview, research document, article, or multiple sources and transform those sources into a voice-ready YouTube script. The workflow is designed to keep the generation anchored to the supplied source material rather than encouraging the system to freely wander away from it. And that distinction matters when we are talking about AI slop. Narratora also gives creators control over elements like tone, audience, and length. While creator inserts allow personal commentary, opinions, brand mentions, quotes, or calls to action to be blended naturally into the generated content. In other words, the source provides the informational foundation, but the human creator still has to provide perspective, judgment, and personality. It does not make AI infallible, and critical facts still need to be verified, but it changes the starting point from invent something for me to help me transform this material into something useful. That is a much healthier relationship with generative technology. Because ultimately, we still cannot treat these systems as writers. They are raw material suppliers and transformation tools. The real creative work, the actual writing, only becomes valuable when the human editor steps in to enforce order on the chaos. If this has been worth your time so far, like the video and subscribe to the channel, and let's keep moving. This is where we take control back. If we want to save our work from being swallowed by the rising tide of automated filler, we have to change our entire relationship with generative tools. We have to establish a strict, human-led editing process that strips away the algorithmic fingerprints and rebuilds the narrative from a place of genuine authority. I have spent time refining a systematic framework to do exactly that, built around 7 non-negotiable rules of human-led editing. The first rule is to run a ruthless search and destroy mission on the machine's preferred vocabulary. Generative engines have a highly predictable love affair with specific low-information filler words. They love to examine concepts, paint landscapes of opportunity, act as testaments to progress, and build bridges to the future. They are obsessed with words like leverage, utilize, showcase, and revolutionize. If your draft is littered with phrases like "in today's fast-paced environment" or "it is crucial to consider," you need to delete them immediately. These are the linguistic markers of a machine trying to sound smart while saying absolutely nothing. Replace them with direct active verbs and concrete nouns. If the system tells you that a new technology is a testament to human ingenuity, rewrite it to explain exactly what the technology does, how much it costs, and why it works. The second rule is to inject proprietary truth, which is the one thing the algorithm can never replicate: your lived experience. A language model can synthesize every book ever written about corporate strategy, but it has never sat in a high-stakes negotiation, looked a client in the eye, and delivered bad news. It has never felt the gut punch of a failed product launch or the quiet thrill of a breakthrough idea. When you edit, look for places where the text makes a broad, abstract claim and replace that abstraction with a specific personal story. If the draft says that remote work requires clear communication, tell the story of the time a misunderstood message cost your team a major client. That story is your moat. It is completely unique to you, and it is the only thing that makes your content irreplaceable in a world of infinite duplication. This is also why giving creators a way to insert their own perspective matters. A source-grounded workflow can help organize information, but it cannot manufacture your lived experience. Your opinion, your judgment, your story, and your interpretation are still the parts that make the final piece yours. Think about your own reading habits. If you can find the exact same generic advice on 10 different websites with a quick search, why on earth would you spend your precious time reading an 11th version that says the exact same thing? The third rule is the intellectual sanity check, verifying facts and logic. Because these systems are trained on linguistic patterns rather than a database of objective truths, they are highly prone to hallucination. They do not know the difference between a verified historical event and a fictional story. They only know which words sound plausible when placed next to each other. They will confidently invent a statistic, attribute it to an Ivy League university, and format it perfectly. As the human editor, you are the final line of defense. You must treat every statistic, quote, and historical claim as a suspect in a crime scene until you have personally verified it with a primary source. If you cannot find the original study, do not use it. If the logic of an argument feels slightly off, tear it down and rebuild it. Your reputation is far too valuable to risk on a hallucination. Source grounding can help reduce that risk because the generation begins with material you deliberately supplied rather than asking the model to construct an answer from nothing. But grounded does not mean guaranteed. Whether you are using Narratora or any other generative system, important facts, financial claims, medical information, legal information, statistics, and other high-stakes material still need independent verification. Rule 4 is about structural surgery. AI-generated drafts are notoriously predictable in their architecture. They almost always follow a neat school essay formula: introduction, 3 balanced points, and a neat little bow of a conclusion. Real human thought is messy and asymmetrical. When I edit, I often take the most interesting point, the one buried deep on page 3, and drag it right to the very front. I cut the throat-clearing introduction entirely. If the system spent 4 paragraphs setting the stage, delete 3 of them. Start where the action is, and let the structure mirror the tension of the ideas, not a template. Rule 5 is the cadence test. Language models write in sentences of remarkably uniform length, usually hovering around 15 to 20 words. This creates a monotonous, hypnotic rhythm that practically begs the reader to tune out. I call it the algorithmic hum. To break it, you have to read the text aloud and intentionally vary the sentence rhythm. Hit them with a short, sharp line. Then follow it up with a longer, more lyrical sentence that builds momentum and carries them through to the next major point. If a sentence feels stiff on your tongue, it is because it is written for an eye looking at a screen, not a human ear listening to a voice. That brings us to Rule 6. Strip out the default neutrality. AI is programmed to be safe, polite, and completely non-committal. It loves to say things like, on one hand, this, but on the other hand, that. It refuses to take a stand because its creators designed it to avoid controversy. But safe writing is invisible writing. Nobody watches a video to hear that a complex issue has multiple sides. They watch to see an expert analyze those sides and take a definitive, well-reasoned position. If your edited draft still sounds like a balanced panel discussion where everyone politely agrees to disagree, you have failed as an editor. Make a call, defend it with evidence, but do not hide behind a wall of artificial consensus. Finally, Rule 7 is to write a clean, decisive landing. AI endings are incredibly easy to spot. They almost always wind down with a tired summary, beginning with words like in conclusion or ultimately, before offering a generic platitude about the future of the industry. It feels like an elevator door sliding shut. Instead of repeating everything you just said, end on a single, sharp, forward-looking thought. Give the audience a practical next step, a challenging question, or a stark reality check that forces them to keep thinking about your message long after the screen goes black. The reality we have to face is that the barrier to entry for creating content has effectively dropped to 0. Anyone with an internet connection can now generate enormous amounts of text almost instantly. But because the quantity of content is exploding, the value of generic, unedited information is plummeting alongside it. The only thing that still commands premium attention is deep, human-curated understanding. That means the future of good AI-assisted content probably does not belong to the person who can write the cleverest prompt. It belongs to the person who has strong source material, understands what matters inside it, knows what they want to say, and refuses to outsource judgment. Platforms like Narratora can reduce some of the mechanical work around that process by turning your sources into structured content through predefined professional workflows instead of making you repeatedly copy information between tools and rebuild prompts from scratch. But generation should still be the beginning of the finalization process, not the end. Narratora itself includes an editor because the creator still needs to review, modify, refine, and decide what ultimately deserves to be published. That is the relationship with AI worth building. Treat the machine as your assistant rather than your author. Give it stronger source material. Keep it anchored to something real. Use your own judgment to reshape the structure, challenge the logic, inject your experience, vary the rhythm, and give the final piece a point of view. Do not let the machine replace the part of the process that makes the work human. Use it to build the foundation, and then do the hard, necessary work of making it yours. And if you want to try that source-first approach for yourself, you can turn your sources into finished content at narratora.com. That's my take on it, and thanks for hearing me out. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want more of these, and I'll see you next time.